So now I'll explain to you some of the other trigger types. So the trigger is a input that is for voltage, and that could be a piezo pad, or it can be on the A trigger of an FSR. FSR is always going to be on the B input because that is powering the FSR. FSRT is a special use of the FSR where on the tom-tom inputs we are able to get both a trigger and power out of the B input. So you would never use this on the A input. We would really have it on the B input, and we would assign it to FSR or FSRT. So this is a special function that we use when we're using tom-toms, or if we're using a foot controller where we want to read the continuous controller on the foot controller on the inputs. Then we have something called a switch. A switch again is also for the B input, and this tells the DITI that we are using a membrane switch. These are popular technology used by both, let's say, Roland and Yamaha and others, of course, that basically tells you whether you're striking the bell or the edge of the cymbal, or whether you're striking the rim of the drum. And what it does, it combines a trigger, a piezo that's on the A input, and then it has a membrane switch that's on the ring of the input. So the ring is our B input, and when you set it to switch, it's looking for a membrane switch. And what the DITI does, it either plays the sound coming from the tip of the ring, depending on whether the membrane has been activated. And that is defined in what we call the slots. So if we go back to our slots, slot 1 is always going to be for the trigger. Slot 2 is going to be if the membrane has been activated. Slot 3 is going to be if the second membrane is going to be activated, meaning that you have a cymbal that has one membrane for the bell, one membrane for the edge. So the bow gets slot 1, the edge gets slot 2, and the bell gets slot 3. So we're getting 3 different sounds out of the one trigger by just plugging it in and setting the input type to switch. Now we also have one more slot, and that is slot 4. And that is if you go past 0 and you find the input that says choke. I think I passed it. Here it is. Choke on. If you set slot 4 to choke, then the pad will also recognize when you are choking your pad. We decided to have this as an option so that you could have, for example, a membrane switch on a cymbal where you can go between a cymbal sound and a crash sound, but you don't want it to choke. And so by having this feature available where you can turn it on and off, it basically guarantees no false positives. So if you don't have it set to choke on, then the cymbal will not choke. But there are some soft synths, let's say from Addictive Drums and others, that use a note number to choke a sound. So this is where you would assign that particular note number that's in their manual to choke the crash sound. So slot 4 is used for cymbal choking. Slot 3 is used for the second membrane switch, usually the bell. Slot 2 is used for the edge, and slot 1 is used for the bow. It gets really interesting and a little bit complicated, but that's why we have pad types. If you had just set the on head, let's just say we set it to a cat ride, By just setting the pad type to cat ride, it automatically set that input type to switch on the B, and it's set up automatically trigger on the ride, and now that symbol is all set to go for controlling those 3 or 4 sounds on the pad. Okay, so getting back to the pad types, input types. So we've gone over again. The trigger means that it's just a voltage for playing loud and soft. FSR, which means we're powering the pad on the ring. These are FSR pads. FSRT means that we're also powering on the ring, but we're also getting the B input can also send out a note number. And the reason why we don't do this automatically is that because if the B channel is providing a note number and powering the A, it does take some of the dynamic range, at least in terms of the numbers, away from the pad. So maybe instead of getting 500 numbers, maybe we're only going to get 180 or 200 numbers out of the training. But remember, MIDI only has 127, so you really don't hear much of an effect. But we wanted to have this option in case you wanted to squeeze out more inputs out of the DITI. Then we have the hi-hat controller, and this is reserved for the hi-hat pedal on 7A. And then we have controller number, and that means that we are assigning an input to act like pressure. So when you press down on the pad, rather than sending out note numbers, it sends out controller numbers. This is really a powerful feature because now you can set pads up to send out pitch bend or modulation or to control panning. Very powerful feature, which we'll talk about later. So these are your input types and your pad types. After pad types and input types, the next screen that comes up in the global screens is exclusive. And what exclusive does is essentially only allows one sound to come out of a dual zone at a time. When you're using a membrane switch, you don't need to do this because the membrane switch is controlling that. The switch only allows one sound to happen at a time. But if you're using a dual zone piezo trigger, for example, it's very easy to get false triggering because both piezos activate when you smack the drum anywhere on it. So by turning on exclusive, what exclusive does, it looks at the post-training of the voltages, and whoever's the biggest wins. Only one goes out, which prevents false triggering. You can very often just get rid of that by using the interaction training. But for those pesky inputs where you just can't seem to get rid of interaction, this is a draconian way of resolving that situation. So that's why we put it in there.